All right. Well, welcome everyone to our webinar today, Storytelling for the Media, Capturing Taxpayer Stories. My name is Fran Rosebush, and I work with both the Assets and Opportunity Network and the new Taxpayer Opportunity Network here at CFED. We'd like to welcome you to the webinar where we're going to be working with our partners, the Hatcher Group, who also manage tax credits for working families, to talk today about how to identify and tell taxpayer stories. This webinar is hosted by the Taxpayer Opportunity Network, which is our new network seeking to provide support and facilitate connections and coordinate efforts for the national field of community tax preparation. A part of that work will be providing learning opportunities such as this webinar today. And so if you'd like to sign up for the Taxpayer Opportunity Network, if you haven't done so yet, receive updates about future learning events, you can do so on our website and at the link that's on your screen. cfed.org/programs/Taxpayer Opportunity Network /join. And we'll be sharing this webinar and slides after today's after today's webinar, and so you can also access this link. And before we get started, I'm going to cover a couple housekeeping items with you. So first, this webinar is being recorded, and it will be available on our resource directory online within 1 week. All attendees, you have been muted to ensure sound quality, but please feel free to submit questions as we go along using the chat box on the right side of your screen. And at the end of today's webinar, we'll reserve time for questions and answers with today's presenter. And if at any time you incur any technical difficulties, feel free to submit those questions to gotomeeting@cfed.org. So today's webinar are a part of our efforts to prepare for VITA Awareness Day, which is next week on March 10th. And so at the end of today's presentation, Lauren Pescatori from the Hatcher Group will be presenting. She'll share a little bit more with you about what is VITA Awareness Day and how you can get involved. And so today's speaker will be Lauren Pescatori. She's a Senior Communications Associate at the Hatcher Group, and she's the Director of Tax Credits for Working Families. Now, Lauren, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Fran. Good afternoon, everyone. So first, I'd just like to introduce tax credits for working families a little bit and tell you about what we do. We are a nonpartisan communications campaign led by the Hatcher Group to promote tax credits like the EITC and child tax credit at both the state and federal level. We work to connect VITA sites, policy groups, and advocacy organizations to both policymakers and the media. So that can mean anywhere from writing press releases, testimonies, and writing talking points to creating visuals like this EITC infographic that you see below. Our website, www.taxcreditsforworkingfamilies.org, is kind of a one-stop shop for all things tax credit related. So news, resources, legislation. It features this interactive 50-state resource map where you can click on an individual state and filter tax credit legislation, see which tax credits they offer, when they were enacted, and at what percentage of the federal credit. So I encourage you all to check out our website after this presentation, sign up for our blog, and be sure to follow us on Twitter at TaxCreditsWF. So why am I here today? A lot of the work that we do is at the policy level, which is why it's really important that we partner with you all, the VITA community, because you're actually working face-to-face with the families and individuals that we advocate for, and we want to help make sure that their stories are being heard and that they're being heard by the right people. Next slide, please. So first of all, what do we mean when we say storytelling? Storytelling is essentially finding people who benefit from the service you provide that are willing to speak to its value by sharing their experiences. So there's really two ways to think of storytelling. The first is from a business perspective. We can think of storytelling kind of like a business testimonial. Let's say I need a mechanic, right? So I Google mechanics in my area, and the first thing that I look at is what people said about each mechanic, because I know I can trust those reviews. So client stories are really key to any business. And then the second way to think about storytelling is on a much more personal level. Storytelling really humanizes your campaign. It puts a face to the name of VITA services and tax credits like the EITC. We all know there's a lot of talk at the policy level about the effectiveness of safety net programs and asset building and so on and so forth. There's research presented and there's statistics, but it's the people like you who actually hear and see firsthand the impact that these programs like the EITC have on the lives of people who collect them. And those are stories that research and statistics can't tell, and that's really powerful. You're lifting up voices that aren't typically heard. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with the story that went viral about a month ago about a Detroit man who walks more than 20 miles every day to get to and from work. And I felt that was a great example of the power of storytelling because a picture of this man walking through the snow appeared in a newspaper article along with a story about his long trek each day because he can't afford a car and he lacks access to reliable public transportation. His story then resulted in a Kickstarter campaign that raised enough money for him to be able to buy his own car. And most people know that those living in poverty in suburban areas have little to no access to reliable transportation, but it was really hearing this man's story that got people motivated to act and do something to help out. So third, we all know that taxes are no walk in the park. They are wonky, they're complicated, and storytelling really helps your audience better understand complex ideas. So, I mean, we may not all understand the phase-in and phase-out structure of the EITC, but almost everyone can wrap their heads around what a huge difference a $3,000 tax refund can mean for a single mother of three. And lastly, storytelling can help to keep VITA alive. So what do I mean by that? I've heard time and time again from so many of my colleagues that work as VITA preparers that the demand for VITA services is at an all-time high, but the resources just aren't there. And storytelling can really help you to approach funders with a compelling reason to support the work that you do. Stories are also extremely attractive to the media. So with all the talk around the EITC and CTC at the federal level this past year, we got a ton of calls from some really big name reporters who were looking for recipient stories. So if we're fully connected with you all and we know that you have great stories for them on hand, we can point reporters in your direction. Then the more media coverage that you get, the more visibility your services will get, and the more funders will want to support your work. Next slide, please. So what makes a good story? First of all, let me preface this by saying that the Hatcher Group, along with the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities and Hart Research Associates, conducted some polling work and messaging research around the EITC and broader safety net programs back in 2012. And this work really helped to inform our communications efforts around the issue because it showed what messages around lower income taxpayers are most effective and for a broader audience. So anyone who's interested in learning more about that research we did can email me after the presentation. I'd be happy to discuss that further with you. But for today, I'm going to talk about what this messaging research taught us about effective storytelling. So number one, you want to be on the lookout for sympathetic situations. Single mothers and fathers are particularly compelling storytellers. You know, the majority of Americans identify with family as a core value, so that also includes grandparents raising children, also others caring for elderly or disabled dependents. Those have proven to be very compelling storytellers. Second, you want to select a family or an individual that demonstrably works hard. So parents who work full-time, or maybe they used to work full-time, but they're now unable to because their employer cut back on their hours. These recipients are especially compelling because they illustrate the idea that a lot of safety net programs like the EITC are really temporary work supports during tough times. Third, clients that are newer to VITA, as you'll see on the right, they can illustrate that they can really make the comparison between the tax refunds that they received prior to VITA and then the refund that they're receiving now and what they're able to do with the extra money that they're now receiving. Members of the military poll extremely well. That also includes veterans. And business owners are extremely well liked. So finding a business owner that can speak to how VITA services allowed his or her business to thrive, a VITA client that is a business owner, or you might even be able to find a business owner who can speak to the fact that the EITC is good for business because it puts money back into the pockets of local consumers. So you really have a win-win with business owners. Next slide, please. So what should you avoid? You want to avoid picking families that fit stereotypes about dependent people. So what do I mean by this? Don't select a family with a lot of children or one that's been on welfare for a lengthy period of time. We all remember the infamous Mitt Romney 47%er quote. It's important to make sure that you emphasize that your storytellers are not takers. They're working hard to improve their situation. You want to avoid mentioning exactly how much money your storyteller makes. So this is kind of a different one because people tend to pick apart their income and make assumptions about how they're managing their money. So for example, if you tell the story of an individual who makes, say, $30,000 a year, someone who makes a similar amount can be offended by that and wonder why they're not receiving any help, you know, on their taxes, things like that. People tend to pick it apart, so that's just something to be aware of. And then just as a side note, you want to be prepared to have to defend your storyteller. You all do this work regularly. You know the stereotypes and the negative feelings that exist about people who collect tax benefits. So when you're telling someone's story, you're really putting their personal information out there for others to judge, and you just want to be able to be prepared to defend that. Next slide, please. So how can I capture a story? Those of you that work as VITA preparers, you know your clients pretty well. You likely already have a few ideas of who might make a great storyteller. So you want to explain to your clients first the importance of storytelling to help keep VITA sites well-resourced, and then ask if they'd be willing to share their personal experiences. So make sure to be clear on how you plan to use their story. This kind of helps put them at ease about sharing something so personal with you. And then make sure to have your storyteller sign a content release form. So this allows you to use their information. And then you want to schedule a time to interview them. So whether that's over the phone, could be in person, or you could do a video interview. And you want to start by asking basic questions about where they're employed, their family structure, et cetera. But you also want to ask questions that will provoke meaningful conversation around VITA and the importance of VITA. So things like, how are you filing your taxes before using VITA? Why did you choose to start coming to our VITA site? How do you typically use your tax refund? And just as a side note, I mean, these interviews can also be a great chance to do some background research on how to reach more clients for your VITA site. So, I mean, ask your storyteller how they first heard about your site, and then use their ideas to be able to reach more clientele. Next slide, please. Crafting your story. So if your story is written and not in the form of a video, it's really important to try to use a picture of the storyteller or some kind of visual. Again, we have this aspect of really humanizing the story when there's a picture involved, and it also makes your story more credible. So as, are the slides not moving? Oh, there we go, visuals. And then as you're compiling the story, you want to start off first by emphasizing the fact that your storyteller is working and therefore is paying income tax, also as well as other taxes like sales and payroll. And this, again, goes back to the 47%er idea. You're really emphasizing that this person is working and giving back to their community. Next, you want to try to use statistics when possible. So include the number of people that were served by your VITA site or the total VITA sites in your community, and then emphasize the fact that your storyteller is one of many who has benefited or could benefit from these services. Lastly, you want to try to include a direct quote from your storyteller, and we'll go into this a bit when I talk more about video storytelling, but this is really a great way to personalize your story and make an impact. Next slide, thank you. So here's an example of a story that we did for our website, www.taxcreditsforworkingfamilies.org, about a woman named Alicia who collects the child tax credit. So as you can see, we used a picture of Alicia and her daughter, and we start out with the fact that Alicia is a single working mother that not only works full-time but also takes college classes. We emphasize the fact that the cost of living in her area is extremely high, yet her state requires a minimum wage of only $8.25 an hour. We do not go directly into how much money Alicia makes each year. What we do emphasize instead is that Alicia is carefully managing the credit that she receives. She uses part of it to pay for her heating bill in the winter. She uses another part to pay for college courses in the hopes of furthering her education and one day getting a higher paying job. She uses another part to make car payments to get to and from college. And then all of these things help Alicia keep food on the table and a roof over her daughter's head. And we used this story during a time of heated debate around whether or not to expand the improvements to the EITC and child tax credit that are scheduled to expire in 2017. So you'll notice that we have a policy ask at the end to make permanent those expansions. And then we use data to back up our policy ask. We note that Alicia is one of many who could lose her child tax credit if the expansions are not made permanent. Your stories don't always have to have such a clear policy ask. They can if you want, but overall they're going to be showing the impact that VITA services make on the lives of lower income workers. So just make sure to make the connection between the ways in which your storyteller's tax refund has helped them make ends meet, and then the fact that your VITA site helps them to collect and maximize that refund. Next slide, please. So here are two other examples of compelling stories. In 2013, North Carolina eliminated its state EITC. And the North Carolina Justice Center responded to the elimination by pulling together a video series featuring former state EITC recipients, and it was called First in Flight from the EITC. which I thought was really clever. Each video featured a different individual talking about what a difference the credit made in their lives and how their finances have been restricted since the credit was eliminated. And this was a really brilliant use of storytelling. It got really great media pickup in North Carolina, but it's worth noting, however, that it can be tricky sometimes to tell stories in the form of videos because you want to make sure that the messages that you know to be most successful are coming in through these stories, but you don't want to force your storytellers to read from a script, right? So you want the words to be their own. So for example, if you ask your storyteller how they spent their tax refund last year and they respond with, on a flat screen TV, more progressive-minded individuals aren't going to see anything wrong with that, but people with a 47%er mentality might totally rip that apart. So you have to be careful to make sure that your storyteller is using effective messaging, which can sometimes make video storytelling difficult. It's just something to keep in mind. On the right is another example of effective storytelling done by CFED a few years ago. They use a picture, as you'll see. They emphasize the fact that their storyteller, Desiree, is working as well as caring for her children and then the children in her daycare that she runs. They even got a quote from Desiree about how much their services have made her, quote, actually like paying taxes. And I mean, I can't think of a better quote than that to prove VITA's worth. It's made a taxpayer actually enjoy paying taxes, which I think is extra powerful. They also use a before and after comparison of Desiree's experience before coming to their site and after, so what a difference VITA has made in her life. And then they close with a quote which really wraps up the story by personalizing it. Next slide, please. So now you have the story. So what do you do? So first and foremost, stories can be a great way to show your funders that their support is making or has the potential to make a meaningful impact on your clients' lives. So you want to incorporate stories into grant writing or interim reports. And then along that same line is media coverage. Media coverage can be one of the most powerful tools in your work. It really grabs the attention of all invested parties. That's the public, policymakers, funders, et cetera. And the right media coverage can not only get great visibility for your organization, but it can also sway public opinion and really garner support from lawmakers. So how do you get your story in front of the media? You want to pitch it directly to them. So look for reporters that cover issue areas like personal finance or taxes because they are likely to cover VITA-related issues. At the Hatcher Group, we use a paid service called Cision that allows us to build lists of reporters that cover certain issue areas, but you can find them without using that. Even a simple Google search of your local news outlets in the words finance or taxes or savings will pull up recent articles. And then generally a reporter's email address will be included in their article. So just shoot them a quick email with a catchy subject line like, you know, meet Alicia or meet your storyteller. Give a brief description of their story, not the entire thing. And then you want to include your contact information with a note that your storyteller is available for further interview. And you want to be sure to time these pitches effectively. So during tax time or around the release of new data or a report on the EITC or VITA. So reporters, during these times, reporters will already be writing about these issues, so they'll be looking for good stories to include in their articles. And then aside from pitching these stories, you can build a story bank on your website. CFED has done a great job of this with their Assets and Opportunity Network, in which they have an entire archive of uplifting stories of people who have achieved some sort of financial empowerment, and then they're also collecting stories, as Fran mentioned, for the Taxpayer Opportunity Network. And the story bank can just be pictures and short blurbs about your storyteller, and then also make sure to include your contact information so media or anyone else is able to get in touch with you if they're interested in further interviewing your storyteller. Story banks are also a really powerful resource to present to funders. Just having that collection of stories all in one place can be really powerful. So while you're building your story bank, you want to be sure also to keep a few powerful stories on hand and actually off of your website, because these stories can be used if you receive an unexpected media request. A lot of reporters like to feel that they have unique information, so they might be hesitant to use a story that lives directly on your website that other people have been able to access. So that's why it's important to just have a few on hand that you can share with them individually. And then testimonials. So we've focused a lot today on the idea of you telling somebody else's story for them, but this is a way to really let the storyteller share their own experiences firsthand. So you can work with your storyteller to write up a powerful testimony that really emphasizes the points that we discussed today. You can partner with the state policy group in your area that works around tax-related issues. They'll likely be involved with committee hearings throughout the year, and you can work with these groups to bring your storytellers in front of lawmakers to testify on the importance of VITA and the EITC. And you can even get lawmakers to come out to your VITA site and meet with some of your clients, which is a great way to garner media coverage. And lastly, get in touch with us. The Hatcher Group has a number of resources that we can use to help you get significant media coverage. We're happy to look over any stories that you might have and make sure they're messaged effectively. You should also submit your stories to CFED's Story Bank that we just discussed. Cameron Parsons, who is on this webinar today, will work with you to edit your stories and make sure that they are effectively messaged. So you have a lot of options here with ways to get your stories out. And lastly, next slide, please. We just want to remind you to take part in VITA Awareness Day, which is March 10th. We will be working with CFED to release new information about the amount of money returned to workers last tax season through VITA sites. There will be a national press release going out, and you can coordinate your storytelling efforts around that, as well as social media efforts that we'd love for you to be a part of. You can join the conversation on Twitter using the hashtag VITAWorks. And we also encourage you to keep using this hashtag even after VITA Awareness Day, just to make sure we keep the conversation going throughout the year. And so without further ado, I would like to thank you all for your time today, and I welcome any questions that you might have.
Great. Lauren, thank you so much for that information and for sharing all these tips with us today. We do have a few questions. One of them that I wanted to start off with is, what have you found it effective in explaining the importance of storytelling to clients that you're working with at VITA sites in order for them to understand why it matters if they share their story with you?
Sure, and I think we touched on this a little bit, but to go into it a little bit more is just making sure that your clients really understand that VITA sites need expansion. I mean, that we were talking about they're under-resourced. There's a lot of people like your storytellers that could benefit from VITA services that might not be able to because there just really isn't enough capacity, and that these stories can be really compelling to funders and at the federal level, at the policy level, to garner more support for VITA and more funding for the IRS. So I think just making sure that your storytellers really understand the connection between their stories in keeping VITA alive and well-resourced.
Great. Thank you. Here's more of a technical kind of access question. Is you had mentioned it's important to have them sign a content release form. Are there examples of content release forms, or one online or on your website that people can see?
You know, I think the IRS actually has one that they use, but I'm happy to circulate one that we used when we did Alicia's story with anyone who's interested. So I'd be happy to show. It's usually anyone who has worked with video or you know, sharing stories online. You should be able to access the content release form pretty easily. But I'm more than happy to share one.
Great, thank you. And my colleague Cameron's telling me that we have one in our resource library
oh, perfect.
as well. So if anybody wants to go to the Taxpayer Opportunity Network website, check the resource library. See, another one is a question came in about social media. What have you seen about, or is it useful to use social media to share taxpayer stories?
Absolutely, and that was something that I was actually thinking about as I was going through my presentation. So I'm glad someone asked the question, was that I really didn't touch much on social media, but that is super powerful. As I was talking about the story about the Detroit man that went viral, that really went viral thanks to social media. I mean, it started off as an original article in a newspaper, but it got over 1 million shares on Facebook. It went viral on Twitter, and so stories can sometimes be even more powerful in social media than traditional media. One, because it's a lot easier to share visuals on social media, and two, just because things can be so quickly shared and widely distributed. So if you can come up with some kind of really short blurb for Facebook and share one of your taxpayer stories on there, maybe link to a longer story, a quick tweet. This is something that we'll talk about with VITA Awareness Day, coming up with just a short tweet and then a link to your taxpayer story that can be really, really powerful. So definitely don't underestimate the power of social media when you're telling these stories, and make sure that anything that you are pitching to reporters that you're also sharing on your social media accounts.
Great. Super helpful. So this one's kind of related to the first question that I asked. So when we're working with taxpayers at VITA sites, often there can be some hesitancy or to share personal information like finances. And so, have you had any tips about how to overcome a client's reluctance to share personal information with you?
So and you all that work as VITA preparers, you will know, I mean, you have much deeper relationships with your clients than I ever will, working in the communications field. I was really lucky with Alicia's story that she actually contacted me, and she had read something about, she'd read a fake news article, kind of like The Onion, but a conservative version of The Onion, that said that the child tax credit was getting completely removed from the tax code, and that they weren't going to be able to collect it next year, which isn't true at all. And she panicked, and she found our website, and she called me, and she said, look, I collect the child tax credit. It makes such a difference in my life, and I'm terrified that they're going to be getting rid of it. And I said, no, that's not true, first of all. And second of all, like, would you be willing to talk to me, about what a difference it's made in your life, so that we can make sure that this tax credit doesn't go anywhere? Like, you can help to make sure that, people are hearing how important this credit is in your life. And we talked a little bit about that. She was absolutely fine with it. She shared her story with me. So I think it's really just making your clients feel more at ease. All kind of goes back to just saying, I mean, you can even offer to not use their last name. It really does help to have a picture, but if that makes them uncomfortable, then you obviously don't need to use a picture. But it really, really helps to put them at ease by making sure that they know that lifting up their voice can really help to save some of these programs.
Great, that's really helpful. And there's been a couple comments, like people kind of echoing that it's hard to get people to share their personal information or get them to follow up when they've reached out to request their taxpayer story. So it sounds like your tips are really helpful to think about, like, what to take into consideration when talking to the taxpayer about the value of this. And, we have another question here about what are we trying to accomplish, or what is the goal of VITA Awareness Day?
Well, so that is something, I mean, Fran, I don't know if you want to touch on that, or I can too. But VITA Awareness Day is really just, on our end, it's a coordinated effort between CFED, which obviously has stepped into this role, formerly held by NCTC, to kind of coordinate all the local VITA sites and really make form a learning community and really make a mass effort at the national level to raise awareness about VITA, keep VITA funded, keep funding increased for the IRS, and ultimately just to be able to increase the amount of people who are collecting credits like the EITC. I mean, I'm sure all of you are aware that 1 in 5 EITC eligible taxpayers are not collecting the credit, and that's been a big issue. And VITA plays such a huge role in ensuring that everyone who's eligible for the EITC is able to collect it and is collecting it. And so we are partnering with CFED really for VITA Awareness Day to really raise awareness around just how valuable VITA is for people who collect these credits, and then also in just what a difference it can make in the lives of someone who might have been getting a $200 tax refund through a different tax preparer, and then through VITA is now able to get $1,000. So how much money it's returning to the community, and what a difference it's made in the lives of people who can't necessarily afford paid tax preparation. And so if you want to discuss VITA Awareness Day, I encourage you to email me after this webinar. I can also put you in touch with Kristen Lawton from CFED, who is coordinating the effort on CFED's end, and we can talk a little bit more about the Taxpayer Opportunity Network's involvement in VITA Awareness Day and exactly what we're trying to accomplish. So, but I mean, I would identify it as number 1, media coverage, number 2, funding, and those are obviously both very connected. More media coverage generally leads to more funding, not always, but that is the hope. And then really just promoting the way in which VITA can serve as a financial empowerment tool. So.
Yeah, great, Lauren. That was great. And if anybody wants to read any more about VITA Awareness Day, the director of the Taxpayer Opportunity Network, J.C. Craig, just published a blog post. So if you go to CFED.org and click on one of our navigation buttons, it's called the blog, or you can go to /Inclusive Economy, which is the name of our blog. You can read JC's blog post, and he talks about the goals of VITA Awareness Day and how you can get involved. And through that also, if you do, you can reach out to Lauren, and you can also reach out to one of us on our team at Taxpayer Opportunity at CFED.org is our email address if you want to ask any more about VITA Awareness Day or anything that you've heard today in the webinar. And so with that, Lauren, that is the end of our questions that have come in. I want to thank you so much for your time today and all of this thoughtful information and your partnership. And for everyone on the webinar, we have been recording this, and so we'll be sharing the slides and the recording on our resource library within a week. And then I think Lauren also on the Tax Credits for Working Families website will be sharing it as well.
Great. Thanks so much, Fran.
Of course. All right, everybody, have a great afternoon.